Totally, because it's gone beyond just being a format of music, because there's so many. Like, think how many people who maybe buy a record and do have a record player, but listen to it a couple times on vinyl, but then they just stream it most of the time, and a record they really like. When vinyl was a thing before, it's like you could listen to records on vinyl, and then on vinyl and tape. So like there wasn't streaming, so it was like that was the way you had to listen to it. But the strength of the format is now so much beyond the like sitting down and listening to it. I like what you said. It's like has so much to do with about your identity, how you connect to things. I'd say music is a art form or a way of expression that's like plagued with challenges. And
yes.
So like if you're like someone like a singer-songwriter or a band or whatever of any kind of different format, any kind of genre, making a cool song is the easiest part of the process.
Sure.
Because there's like, first, you got to make a cool song. Then you have to record it in a way that sounds awesome.
Right.
That's hard.
Right.
Then you have to get it mastered in a way that serves the music, mixed and mastered.
And first of all, many people are like, what does that even mean?
Totally.
Right.
Like, you got to get it mixed in a way that works for the recording. Then you got to get mastered in a way that works for it. But then you have to get cool artwork, like awesome artwork, that someone knows how to actually make, like the files and everything.
Right.
But then your vinyl has to be cool vinyl. It's got to feel the right way. It's got to look the right way. Your labels need to be cool. Your insert that goes in the record's got to be awesome.
Right.
The actual way the cover feels in someone's hands and how thick it is has to be good. This is like nightmare scenario. And then it's like, you got to get it distributed. You got to get it marketed. Like, I'm sure every art form has something like that. This is one that I just happen to be more related to. It's like, it seems like anytime you get a record that hits on all of those levels, it's like a miracle.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the alignment of stars is pretty interesting to think about. Like, I don't know if this is corny to make this reference or whatever, but I forget the name of the song. There's a Tribe Called Quest song that talks about the kind of rules of the music industry. I forget what it's called right now. But there's one line where he says, he sort of lays out all the things you need to do, right? Don't take shorts, like don't get underpaid by the promoters and stuff like that. And then there's one line that just says, and you better hope that the product is dope, which is just like, that's something you have less control over, right? Like there are ways to plan for things and ways to sort of like not plan for things.
Yeah.
And maybe the not plan for things is more of the, chemistry of the musicians that are involved, right? You can plan for things with vinyl, of course, right? And there's a lot of planning that goes into it. And I think that's what you're touching on. So yeah, it is interesting to think about the sort of alignment of factors that all need to come together, some planned for, some unplanned, for that miracle to happen. I love showing people around the record plant because it's kind of like unlocking this sort of like, like black magic spell about how records are made and what that looks like, right? Because relatively few people think about that when they're buying a record. I've been around the process for a very long time and I'm still charmed by it intensely, right? So yeah, I think that there's just like a lot of factors that I think like are like, so some of them bewildering, some not, right? And it is a challenge we think about too, because we're really focused on developing programs for well, we call them developing artists. That's sort of our parlance for it. And that means that, typically it's someone making 100 or 200 or 300 records and they don't know what, electroplating means. You show them 12-inch DMM cutting and it's a mystery. And coming back to the lack of gatekeeping, like it really is kind of important to have this elaborate and difficult thing distilled into something that's relatively straightforward. So yeah, actually I would say it's something we're thinking about a lot right now as far as how to make the process accessible and tangible, even though there are quite a few stages of production and complexities involved in making a great record.
Totally. So let's get into like the specifics of what you do.
Okay.
So let's just assume some band out there writes an amazing record, any genre, amazing record, and they get it mixed beautifully, mastered beautifully. The artwork is incredible. And they have either their friend who's like, you know what, I'm going to start a record label, or they have an established record label.
Right.
They're looking to get that record pressed. what happens when you enter the picture?
Right. So people will have their digital audio and digital artwork together for the most part. If they don't, we can help them with that. But those are really the two pathways, right? There's the audio and the artwork. The audio becomes the vinyl, and the artwork becomes all the printed material that accompanies it. So we print and manufacture, but also project manage all of that, because there are complexities as far as, you know, making sure the artwork is set up in a way that will print professionally. With a vinyl, there's also a lot of factors too that we try and distill into something easy, which is, okay, how long is your side, right? What audio impact does that have if it's particularly long? What RPM should it be cut at? As I keep saying, these can be distilled into relatively simple conversations, but it's the type of thinking we engage in to try and, you know, sort of lock it into a pathway and, you know, push that cart on the track, right? So there's a lot of work in the beginning stages of getting it set up. And then from there, things flow relatively smoothly. I mean, a record manufacturing process is typically 6 to 8 weeks, right? With a lot of the heavy lifting in the first 2. Yeah.
You say 6 to 8 weeks, but is that true now?
It's true now, yeah. I mean, 8 weeks is something that we do relatively, well, very consistently. 6 weeks is something we're pushing toward, and it's possible in certain circumstances. Like I say, we're thinking about the developing artist side of things a lot these days. It's been a big topic of conversation. We do a lot of work for indie labels and major labels that are making, you know, tens of thousands or whatever a year, hundreds of thousands in the major label case, because our business is split between the indie side and the major side. I'm focused on the indie side. That's my big area of responsibility within the sales side of things. Anyway, on the developing artist side, you know, when you do 100 or 200, removing test pressings from the equation actually is not something that we're used to thinking about, but is proving to be a very interesting strategy to get a 6-week turnaround.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean, there are new quality control processes that are the result of like software innovations and hardware innovations that we've installed at the plant that kind of like can deal with some of these test pressing questions. And, you know, we looked at the approval rating, it was close to 97%. And we thought, maybe for the small runs, this is the way to make 6-week turnarounds happen. So that's what we're developing.
Man, that's interesting. I want to delve into that, but I want to go back to my question, because I didn't want to sound like I was like, you know, poking at you there. When I say, is it true, for anyone who is a fan of music or in a band or running a record label, I think a big challenge since, like, I guess maybe around 2016 going on, was like increasing wait times to get something pressed. So when I was first introduced to the record pressing industry and how things worked and how the business worked, if you had a completed project that you gave to the plant, it's possible that you'd have records within a month. Right. And like, I mean, this is a long time ago, but it happened, yeah. And this is something I want to talk about later, when majors were not. When I printed the first record I ever did, major labels were not doing any kind of vinyl, and pressing plants were few and far between, and they were grateful for your work. So if you were pressing like 1,000 pieces of vinyl, they're like,
you were a god.
We love
among
you.
Men. Yeah.
you're our dude.
That's right.
I remember like owners of record plants calling me and I was like just some like
so
little
thank you
kid.
Personally?
Well, more to talk to me about the
Okay.
project, right?
Okay.
And being like, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, that's the guy that owns this plant, or the
Right.
person who owns this plant. But then around, I think, and you can correct me on the years, but 2016-ish, or when majors started pressing vinyl again in kind of like the 2005-ish, is that about right? Or 2010?
Yeah, I have some, you know, kind of hallmarks in that time scale, which are more from a personal perspective. So I think it's in it, you know, like anything, it's not a perfect, it's not a, you know, it's not a, there are no perfect dividing lines. But I think of 2007, 2008 as being the first big bump.
Yeah.
Obviously, the big bump was when it was a mass manufactured product in the 70s, but we're well past that. 2007, 2008, that's what I think when major labels started to take notice. Because then you have things like Record Store Day that popped up.
Right.
That increased the profile. And I remember in 2007 and 2008 thinking, okay, this band has a vinyl audience and this one doesn't. And that's a laughable concept now.
Yeah.
You know?
Dude, totally.
Yeah.
So very specifically though, as the major labels became interested again in using this format, it became harder to get records printed.
Yeah.
And I mean, a thing that was really like a live conversation amongst like indie musicians was like, okay, if I finish my record January 8th of the year, it might not come out on vinyl till a year later because wait times at plants are so long. Is it still that case now, or is it a place where plants now have enough capacity, or if you submit something, you could get it within 2 months?
Yeah, it's the last year, I'd say, has been very interesting, and things have changed a lot. So maybe to the uninitiated, it might help for me to say that, you know, you had a resurgence, as it was called in every article, in 2008. And then things kept getting worse, right? Because you couldn't buy a new record press. None existed. So there were these mothballed, broken down presses that were, you know, ancient and frustrating to operate. And they were just getting traded around for higher and higher resale values, right? So there was only so many presses, and the demand just outstripped it. That's obviously why things took a long time. That got worse in 2010, 2015, 2016, like you were saying. And around 2016, there were companies that were manufacturing new equipment again. GZ Media, which is our parent company, they were the first actually in 35 years to make a new press.
Whoa.
And they were only making it for themselves.
Yeah.
They wanted to start a plant in North America, and that's, you know, how we started. And so we ordered, you know, 10 off the line, right?
Yeah.
And that was our entrance into the market. So things were calming down in 2016, 17 as a couple of other places started who were making record presses that were then available to the general public, unlike what GZ was doing. So things started to calm down a bit. And then pandemic, like I said, vinyl exploded all over again, maybe twice as hard. And turnarounds grew to about a year in most places. Totally, I don't know about unfathomable, but just ridiculous that like band members probably hated each other by the time the record came out. I don't know how people were dealing with it. It was just like, you know, it's such a long period for things to change. But the last year has been an interesting kind of correction, because now that, you know, people are participating in music in the ways that they were prior to the pandemic, the demand and the supply have sort of caught up with each other. In fact, there's a bit of a tip now, because a lot of record plants started over the pandemic. Well, they started, and now they're actually, in this last year, a lot of those factories are opening, because it takes some time to, you know, get all the equipment installed. So yeah, now it's actually a competitive industry, which we haven't seen, I don't know since when. You know, I mean, it was competitive when I started in 2002, but the demand was so small that calling it competitive seems quaint.
Yeah.
So I think the 12-month turnaround is a thing of the past now. If plants are batting 12 months, that's pretty crappy, I think. You know, but most plants now have sort of managed to scale that down to about 12 to 16 weeks. We have 35 presses. We're a big ass plant. So we have a lot of capability, and we're making 75,000 disc units a day. So that's a lot different than a regional plant with 2 presses catering to local bands, you know? So we have the ability to shorten that lead time quite a bit, but I would say that's the general picture. We're about 6 to 8, and you know, a lot of plants are kind of between 8 to 16.